Cash is the lifeblood of any startup. We are really privileged to have a fantastic panel to talk about where VCs are funding in IoT. I'd like to introduce Raj Golamudi, who is a director of one of the large players in the venture community. He's a director at Intel Capital. Prior to Intel Capital, he was general manager at Blue Stream Ventures and previously also investment partner at Omidyar Network. So please welcome Raj.
Thank you all for being here. Welcome. We're the final home stretch of today's session on IoT. Now it's time to follow the money. So I'm super delighted to have really a rock star panel here today. Going from my right to going out. By the way, Scott McDonald has been delayed, so maybe he'll show up. But we have. Oh, you're here. Sorry, yeah, I didn't see you. Great, thank you. I wasn't paying attention. Great, thank you. So from my right, we have Joydeep Bhattacharya, who's with Shasta Ventures, which has the distinction of being one of the early investors in Nest, which we all know about. To his right is Rob Trice, who is a partner with Swisscom Ventures. He also has a long background both on the operating side and on the investing side, specifically with Nokia Ventures and Nokia Growth Equity. And then we have Quinn Lee, who is, like Intel, with one of the big players on the corporate side. He's with Qualcomm Ventures, one of the top 3 investors in IoT. And then finally, we have Scott McDonald, who is, runs a fund that's dedicated just to industrial IoT, which tells you where he's all in for sure. So anyway, so let's get started. I wanted to start off by asking sort of a high-level general question, because when we think about investing, timing is critical. Timing is everything in terms of getting the timing right. You can be directionally correct, but if you're off on timing, it's not a great investment. So would love to hear from each of you why there's obviously a lot of excitement about IoT. By some accounts, $1 billion was invested in venture startups last year, where it seemed to be on track to be 2 to 3x that this year. Would love to hear from you about why is there so much excitement about IoT and why now, particularly, especially when you think about it from an investment standpoint. Maybe start with you, Jaydeep.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, IoT is probably coined over the last 1 year or maybe 1.5 years. This is what we investors do in maybe sitting somewhere in Menlo Park or maybe the Silicon Valley itself. We kind of package something which has been around for a while and then name it something, just like big data. A couple of years back, and now it's IoT. IoT, when I think about IoT, it has been around for a while. It probably is coming in its new avatar right now because of a couple of things that happened, right? So one, the emergence of mobile devices, and basically everybody has the mobile device today. So a lot of the different technologies that were not there before, including internet connectivity, with each of these mobile devices, that made the sensors to be present in a lot of these devices. So that has given rise to the IoT in terms of the devices. And if you look at from the side of the enterprise, with all the technologies in the big data and whatnot in the last few years, you have a huge capability to crunch a lot of these data on the enterprise side. So that gives you the back-end analytics today to handle this huge data that is going to come with the Internet of Things. So the combination of two things in my mind gives rise to a really exciting stage set for Internet of Things.
Right, thanks. Rob?
I'm going to hit some of those same points. I was trying to kind of think about how to put this in a smart way, and I came up with a little bit of alliteration, 5 C's, that I think are big things that we've overcome in the last couple of years. One is connectivity. So now we've been able to roll out, we get a stable 2G network that most sensors rely on. We now have LTE. the modules that Qualcomm and others are producing are still a little high there, but coming down. We also have other networks like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, LE, Zigbee that have now matured. The second thing is consumption of power. At the sensor level, that was a huge issue. The third is complexity. At the app layer, it was hard to write the apps. If you wanted to create a connected toaster, you were a toaster maker, you didn't know how to actually take care of connectivity, writing the apps, getting the certification, and doing the testing. Fourth is cost. I mentioned that on the sensor side, but I think the other thing is just the marginal cost of creating these sensors, creating those solutions, and operating those solutions has come down dramatically. And fifth is community, for lack of a better C word, meaning openness and interoperability. So a lot of the first generation of IoT, I think we saw a lot of just point solutions that were closed and maybe controlled by certain vendors, and now you're starting to see a lot more openness and interconnectivity between different sensors.
Yeah, I think previous panelists probably covered most of the key points of IoT. I think there's two aspects, I think, when I think about IoT. So one is actually driven by probably Moore's Law, just the amount of data you can process at the end node. The processing capability of some of these chips that were coming up today allows you to have intelligence at the local end devices, right? So that's one thing. A lot more intelligence can be embedded at small devices, like a wearable device or something that you can embed in the refrigerator or coffee maker or door lock or other things, right? The other thing, I think, as Rob mentioned, is the connectivity, right? So once you have some intelligence on the local side, how do you get the ability to control these devices from a remote location? So the connectivity solutions and then the cost reduction of these connectivity solutions. So Wi-Fi chipset today, for example, it's very, very, very low cost compared to 10 years ago, right? So both the intelligence, the processing capabilities, as well as the connectivity solutions enables you to make these local sort of dumb devices, if you will, previously, and make them intelligent and make them connected.
Scott?
Yeah, it's Scott McDonald here with McGraw Capital, and I think that, when I think about it, the question you asked about timing, I don't think anyone who's been around the industrial space, wearables and other consumer sides, put that aside. IoT is not new at all. I mean, IBM's been talking about IoT for a very long time. Cisco grabbed the terminology and cranked it into Internet of Everything. In 2012, GE came out with the Industrial Internet, which is a brilliant terminology. It really captures what we're talking about. So in the last year, you've seen an uptake in media and the attention to the IoT space, and it's quite logical because Chambers is talking about it, and Jeff Immelt's talking about it, so it's made it up to that level, and now people are really interested in what they're talking about. And they're throwing out big numbers, trillions, right? When you start talking about trillions, people are interested in it. But why I think the timing is now and interesting for entrepreneurs and for venture capitalists, it's because of the technology adoption and things that we talked about. Sensors are cheap and disposable. Cloud computing allows you to do big analytics and computing power. Moore's Law, it's capable. You can build a software company now, not an enterprise, an industrial software company for what I think is way less than $50 million. And it used to be before, in the Valley, it was $50 million price tag to build an enterprise software company. And now I think you can do it for far less than that. So I think there's a whole bunch of things that lead to the reason about why is the IoT happening now, and are we actually really seeing companies be built now? Interest, and there's real business.
No, great, that's very helpful. So all of you brought up one thing that I wanted to touch on, which is when people talk about IoT, there's a lot of big companies that are playing this space, Intel, Qualcomm, IBM, so on, and GE, so on and so forth. So from your standpoint, again, from an investment mindset, what areas are you focused on in terms of where you're looking for startups to disrupt and have innovation that is complementary to or filling the gaps that the big boys are focused on? So maybe start with you, Quinn.
Go backwards?
Yeah, go just any order. Yeah.
So, we work with a lot of the big companies where I am actually a Cisco IoT champion. My venture fund has a strategic partnership with General Electric. So we think these groups are all great. We focus a lot on the industrial space. So we work with oil and gas, we work with power companies, and there's a nice fit. So as an example, Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, they collect so much seismic data, so much well log data, it's unreal, and they're dumping the data because they can't figure out how to monetize the data. When you think about how you can fit and play into that, it doesn't take long to think about the analytics and doing prescriptive and predictive analytics and taking someone's information, real-time feeds, or just information on historical well logs, and then start to do things like predict failure modes. You know, we're involved in a various number of the industrial spaces. One that we love is water. You know, we have backed and been involved in companies that look at fiber optic monitoring, inline monitoring of pipelines, buried pipelines that you have no idea what's happening in that asset, and if it breaks, you have a massive rupture and disruption to not only the, you know, to people, but also danger when you have sinkholes and other things. So if you can do real-time monitoring of that asset base, which is invisible to people, and be able to do alerts, and then take it one step further and prescribe corrective action in maintenance before things break, that becomes very powerful. So how you play with big companies like GE that make really expensive iron, you go and figure out how to make that run more efficiently.
So in your particular sector, when you talk about industrial IoT, is most of the innovation and most of your investment in sort of, is it an efficiency play? Is it sort of enabling new things that you couldn't do before? Where are you focused in terms of your investments?
Yeah, I think a lot of the drivers of connecting anything is around efficiency. I mean, maybe I get out of my element, so maybe the others can talk about the human side, the human IoT. But I think anything that's industrial, whether it's vehicles, traffic lights, equipment, smart manufacturing, water, it really is about driving efficiency. That's what software does in sensors. Sensors tell you what's happening in real time right now, and once you know what your current state is, you can optimize, and it really is efficiency driven.
Okay, great. How about you, Quinn? At Qualcomm, what sectors are you focused on, and what are you looking for when you look at startups?
Yeah, sure. So from a Qualcomm perspective, right? So we're a technology provider, right? We provide the wireless connectivity solutions, right? Whether it's cellular connectivities like LTE solutions or Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, a variety of basically connectivity solutions, right? So we want to. So some of the verticals we focus on are wearables, one area, right? It's a hot area right now, and then we invested in a company called Fitbit. And then the other areas will be wearables, connected homes, and connected automotives, and connected cities. So in the connected city area, the previous speaker mentioned a company called Streetline, which you know, embeds sensors on the street to be able to detect whether there's a car or not there on the streets. They also do a lot of analytics on the data for the parking management solutions. So those are the main areas I would say we focus on particular verticals and trying to find particular applications that will drive, you know, wireless connectivity solutions.
So from your standpoint, are you looking mostly at software companies that are doing applications, or are you also looking at hardware and other sort of companies that are complementary to Qualcomm in terms of devices?
I would
like
say
Fitbit, you talked about Fitbit, which obviously is they lead with the device, but there's obviously a software component to it.
Right. I would say mostly would be some could be software companies, some could be a device in combination with software as well. So Fitbit, I would say, probably it's a device company, but they're also building software in terms of apps, and they also do analytics on the data they have. And then so is Streetline. Right, Streetline makes the sensors, but they also have a data solution that they analyze the data and they provide the data to cities and municipalities.
So just one last thought on that. So as you look at companies that Qualcomm's focused on, are you looking at more solution providers that are solving real problems, or are you looking at more enablers, platforms? What's your angle?
I would say we're mostly looking for solution providers for a particular vertical, right? At the end of the day, when you think about starting companies, you really have to find a real problem that maybe the vertical has. If you can find a solution to address that real problem, then I think you have a clear value proposition to the end customer you're trying to sell to. So we typically tend to focus on companies that solving a real problem.
Okay, great. Rob,
yeah, to your point
thoughts.
about the big boys and how they're playing, I actually see it as a positive, because now what we have big boys who have provided stable picks and shovels to the industry, stable platforms that we can all build value on, and that's why, from a Swisscom perspective, we're focused more on solutions, to verticals with particular pain points. We made one investment in a Swiss company called Arvium that has a very unique sensor that does independent cargo tracking for food as food moves through the value chain. So you have companies like Nestle, well, they got to find out if their chocolate melts somewhere in transit, where did that happen and who's responsible? So, and on a personal basis, I also have an interest in food and agriculture. I was glad to see Sandy we finally talked about food and farming, because I think is a huge opportunity that's being overlooked. And just as a shameless plug, I have an organization called the Mixing Bowl that is bringing together the IT, food, and ag sectors. We've got a conference at Stanford, June 20th, called Food IT, Soil to Fork. And I thought I would just bring up 3 specific companies in addition to Arvium that I find interesting in the space, and it's just demonstrate the value of IoT. One is another Swiss company called Animon. You could call this the connected cow, or cow sexting. Basically, when the cow starts to ovulate, it sends an SMS message in 3 languages to the farmer, and then the farmer can bring in the bull and get things going. So that's one, I think, very unique thing. There's another startup on the East Coast called Appatronics that's doing a very low-cost, ruggedized, Arduino-based open source telemetry solution for small farmers. And then the last one I was going to mention is a company here out of Lemnos Labs called Six Sensor Labs that does a near real-time gluten detection monitor with a Bluetooth LTE connection to a mobile device. So now you can figure out, and you can share the results of whatever food you're taking. 10% of Americans have some sort of reaction to gluten in their food. So now you have that device connected to an iPhone app, and you can share that information about what you ate and whether it was gluten in that or not. Those are just 4 examples of companies in the food vertical that I find interesting.
Great. Jyoti?
Yeah, so first question about the big companies. I'm actually very happy that the big companies are involved in this, which first means that they are really serious about the space. And second, big companies are very strategic to any play, because they can form the standards, right? I mean, it's very hard for a startup, which is recently funded, to form a standard like a HTTP in just in internet. So those standards are being formed. I mean, I was hearing to Rob from Qualcomm, his keynote, and they are putting all their might behind this platform called AllJoyn. And a couple of others like that would come in, and then there will be a standardization, which is great for IoT. Now, where do we see opportunities to invest in from our perspective? As Raj, you mentioned, we were early investors in Nest, so we have this luxury of having thought through the IoT even before IoT happened over the last 4 years. So that's really great. But at the same time, we also have a really interesting DNA on the enterprise side. We were early investors in Zenprise, which is mobile device management software, Anaplan, and Apptio, which are very, very enterprise focused. So from our fund's standpoint, we want to bring together those 2 key elements and kind of try to find the next interesting enterprise company in IoT. So the way I think about it is just like the whole software stack was rewritten for the internet, and the whole software stack is being rewritten for mobile. The whole stack is going to be, if not rewritten, at least get a major revamp for IoT. So think about how do you load balance in the world of IoT, where so huge number of devices are trying to get connection. How do you crunch data, analyze data, a specific type of data? Sensor data is not like any other data. Sensor data is mostly time series data. How do you analyze and crunch time series data? How do you make sure so many different disparate devices are actually secure? Because if you're moving around, I mean, if you're moving around with your mobile phone now, if your refrigerator, if your lamp, everything is internet connected, how do you make sure that things are not leaking out to the internet? So I believe there is a huge, huge amount of work that needs to be done on the enterprise side of IoT. And that's where I'm kind of focused on over at least the next year or so.
Great. Maybe I'll give Scott and Quinn a chance to talk about your favorite companies, because both Rob and Joydeep talked about their favorite companies, either in your portfolio or outside.
What I'll do is, if you are really interested in the industrial internet space, we published a report about a month ago called the IoT Report, and it highlights not only interviews with Cisco and General Electric and Shell and a few others about how they're thinking about it. So it's really interesting, the articles about how the big companies are thinking about it. But we also highlighted some of the top industrial IoT companies in North America. I'm sorry we haven't done the European version yet, and found some good Swiss ones like the cow one. We'll have to put that in the next report. Somehow I'll make that industrial. But we know of great agriculture companies like FarmLogs and others that are doing really interesting things in that space. And there's, so when you go into the industrial space, I could talk all day long about amazing companies. Because what you have is an underserved market where technology wasn't used, like in farming, like in infrastructure. Even the electricity grid, for all we've talked about, is still, we're close to the Echelon folks, and they've done well with the smart grid at times, but there's still much to be done. So there are companies like Emtel that are doing oil and gas related prescriptive analytics. There's companies out of Houston. There are a platform group of companies that can play into both industrial and into wearables that are just looking to connect anything. We saw a panel earlier today with Ayla and Arient and others like that. So there's no shortage of neat things going on in this world right now in the sort of startup world. What I would say to people is, when growing high growth companies, if you think about the previous speaker that talked about what can you do as a startup to grow, I encourage people to think about viral coefficient. And we've seen companies, and Nest's a great example of a company that had viral coefficient. You know that they tell two friends and they tell two friends, and you've seen it in things like Facebook, but in certain areas, in more industrial settings, whether it's ag or in power, water, we just haven't seen a viral coefficient. Instead, it's the long-term value of a customer. You got to spend $1 million and fly over the world and work them for a year and a half to win a customer, and then you hope to God you get $12 million over the life of that relationship, instead of this viral coefficient, which is it just accelerates on its own. And so we're trying to find companies that can find a viral coefficient in their business model, because I think times have changed and the world and the way we do business has changed. Security aside, because that becomes a big issue we should probably bring up.
Oh, it's great insight. And where would we find that report that you alluded to?
Oh, sorry, mcrockcapital.com.
Okay,
MCROCK capital.com.
Great. Thank you.
And hey, I feel like a commercial. Follow us on Twitter at mcrockcapital.
Great. So actually, you bring up a good point, which I wanted to make sure the other panelists had a chance to talk about as well. Would love to get each of your thoughts on advice for entrepreneurs, from based on all the companies you see, where you're investing. So aspiring entrepreneurs here, people who are thinking about startups in this space, what advice would you have? Maybe starting with you, Quinn.
Yeah, so
areas to avoid, pitfalls to avoid, things to stay away from, things to focus on.
Yeah, I would say probably two things, right? When you start a company, I think you really have to look at, whether it's a technology, device, or software solution, right? What specific problem are you trying to solve? Right, whatever the end customer may be, it could be a direct-to-consumer model, it could be selling to business, but at the end of the day, you're trying to solve a problem for the customer, right? And then as long as you have a very clear value proposition to the customer, and then the next thing you need to think about is, does my solution differentiate it from others, right? How is my solution unique, differentiate from the others? And I would say the third thing is probably distribution. How do you sell to the customer, right? Do you sell it directly to the customer? Do you sell it through a partner? Distribution becomes a very, very, if it's a direct-to-consumer device company like a Fitbit, we're an investor of, they sell directly online, they sell through Amazon, also they sell through retail stores, right? But if it's a B2B business, you could sell to the customer directly, or you could go through a channel partner. So how do you reach that customer becomes a very, very critical thing you need to think through.
Right, thanks. Rob?
I would just add, Quinn and I were talking a little bit about what actually is the Internet of Things. And if somebody tells me they're an Internet of Things company, I'm a little bit skeptical. If that's kind of like if you were to tell me I'm an internet company, what does that really mean, right? And to Quinn's point, go find a pain point and go address it. Find a solution for a pain point, and then you are an industrial company or an energy company or a farm company or food company, go after that specific vertical and that pain point in that. And don't necessarily, I mean, there are some companies like Ayla that are actually the picks and shovels to make Internet of Things happen, but the majority of companies probably are not IoT. And so I would caution you against calling yourself an IoT company, unless you really are, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Jody?
Yeah, I'd say Internet of Things is a really interesting space where you're dabbling not only with software but also with hardware. And for you guys who are going to be dabbling with hardware, make sure that you have protection against commoditization, right? Because hardware can be very cheaply made and very easily copied. But you need to find out a way to delight your end user, be it an enterprise or be it a consumer, so that they want your device. There is a lock-in to your device versus someone else competing. I mean, if you look at wearable space right now, there's quite a few competitors to choose from. Versus if you look at, again, going back to Nest, the way they created the channels, the way they created the experience, there were no other players in the space. So think about that. Think about what makes you protected against commoditization. I think that's a big thing in the IoT space.
Just make a quick point on that point.
Yeah.
So the Swisscom company, RVM, is doing this special, they need a special sensor for tracking this food. They analyze 300 different sensor companies.
Wow.
Which just tells you about the commoditization of the sensors is already
Absolutely.
occurred.
Absolutely.
Good. I think we have time for some questions. I don't know who's keeping track of the time, but time, 4 minutes? Thank you. Questions from the audience for our panel? A few years ago, RFID did a pretty epic crash and burn. Why is this different?
Yeah, I can take that. So that's absolutely an example of where the whole story was not thought through. If you compare, I mean, though iBeacon, there's a new technology that Apple has launched called iBeacon. It's very early days. I won't even venture to even compare that with RFID, but in many ways, it is supposed to fulfill the promises of RFID. But if you go back to why RFID failed, and this is just my personal opinion, it was a technology for technology's sake, right? There was a lot of interesting problems that it could solve, but not in a practical way. The installations were harder, the amount of battery needed, the geographical limits of the devices, all of these were not practical. So at the end of the day, just a technology does not make or break your story. You have to have a full comprehensive offering to your customer, otherwise it breaks down. So that's an, I don't know if you
Any
guys feel-
differing?
Well, I would just play contrarian. I think perhaps it didn't live up to the hype, but the reality is that almost every one of us probably has an HID tag that we use to get into something, or in our, maybe an office key in your wallet, or in the rest of the world, everyone's doing EMV on their cards, their credit cards. So I think actually it just didn't live up to the hype, and it didn't cause a super revolution. But I think RFID has come into the plateau of productivity. It just didn't live up to the hype.
I think in certain applications, RFID worked really well, and I think it's kind of your point. It wasn't mass adoption of it the way people thought, and that was the hype cycle. But I'll tell you what, in its sense, it was a sensor and it was data. And what we've learned over the last 10 years is that data with no analytics is useless, right? And so I always joke that there's no ROI in telling someone they suck, right? You suck. So I know where the truck is, but I don't tell you where it should be. It doesn't make sense. So RFID fell into that a little bit, which it could tell you where things were, but it couldn't tell you where they should be, or better yet, how to use that data to fix the current state and make it better and optimize. So I think that RFID is playing into the IoT now, and thank goodness. There's a lot of kind of reasons that IoT is taking off, and RFID is one of those big factors that's helping it take off. But in certain applications, RFID worked 5-7 years ago just fine. In mass adoption, perhaps it failed compared to what it was expected.
Okay.